Hello and welcome to another episode of Rustacean Station. I'm your host, Alan Wyma. Today I have Sebastian Thiel with us. Sebastian is the creator of Gitoxide, which is I guess the best way for me to say this is kind of like a full rewrite of Git using Rust. Is that the way I would say it, Sebastian?
Rewrite. By the way, thanks for having me on the show. It's like a Christmas gift to me, just so you know. I'm very, very happy to talk about Gitoxide. Is it a rewrite of Git? Probably not, because that kind of implies that Git wants to be rewritten, and it stirs up all these feelings of rewriting in Rust, and it's not about that at all. It's just me being able to create a way to easily write applications that interact with Git, and maybe one day to have a server that can host Git repositories as well, and write some nice applications around that. Yeah, that's Gitoxide in a nutshell.
So wait, you want to use this on the server side to do some kind of interactions with Git, something like a GitHub or a GitLab?
Why not? It's right now, if you try to set up a server that hosts Git repositories, you will probably use the Git binary, and maybe there are solutions for this already, but there's nothing that really seems like it could replace GitHub. And I'm just not thinking of, I want to replace GitHub. It's more like, can you get it to scale that well? Can you actually do that? And what technology would you need to be able to scale to GitHub size? And I think Rust is the language that finally allows to reach that quality that you'd need, and to probably even surpass the quality that Git provides, because they do have certain limitations due to C, and let's say parallelism isn't easy there. And Rust, it is much easier to write. So yes, I want it on the server, because I think Rust can really make the best possible server implementation of Git, which would enable everybody to, host their own version of GitHub, or make their distributed GitHub, or whatever else floats their boat.
Yeah, but writing Rust, it's not straightforward compared to high-level programming languages like, JavaScript, Ruby, Python, these kind of things. And with these, you can still use FFI, right? So let's say you keep your Gitoxide, but you kind of use some FFI to talk to a higher level language. Like, do you think that's just not good enough, or do you think everything should be in Rust?
By now I do think that the only way I would write software that I actually want to use, maybe in a product, is software written in Rust, because it just makes me the most productive. By allowing me to create the highest quality software. I keep repeating that, but that's really just it. I'm the most productive in Rust. Can you do it in other languages? Probably, but it will be much harder. It's just smooth sailing with Rust, from my experience. And I tried a few programming languages before. Writing Git in programming language X, probably I've done that, or tried that at least. So I'm also the author, or maintainer, not the original author, but maintainer for 10 years now of Git Python. So Git in Python, if you so will. And I try to implement...
Git in Python, that must be horrible, because I tried Mercurial and that was just disaster. Sorry for
right. You're right. It's, even though I spent a lot of time writing it, it has so many flaws it is broken in so many ways it can't be fixed anymore. Yet it's incredibly... it's incredibly out there. It's downloaded, 10 million times every month or so. It's incredible. It's very successful somehow, even though it's not great software the way I consider software. After that, after Git Python, I did try in C++, because I was always looking for that programming language that allows me to finally write Git in a way that allows me to be somewhat better, to add something that wasn't there before, that isn't already in the canonical Git, or that is really hard to do, or that allows me to do that, because I couldn't do it in C. I'm not a good programmer per se. I need tool support to be able to do certain things. I tried it in Go, also didn't work. So finally Rust came along. For me, this was 2015, before it was going 1.0. And that's when I got started with Rust, and went through the learning process, circling back to, is it not a bit harder to learn Rust? For me, it was terrible. I was close to nervous breakdowns while trying to solve compiler errors that I just couldn't get it to compile. So close to giving up there back in the days when it was much harder to learn Rust than it is now. But I went through the pain, and I keep saying that pain kind of caused the growth of some tumor that is like a mini borrow checker in my brain. So now I can actually do it. I can write code that compiles the first time around, often at least. And I'm not afraid of Rust anymore. I can pretty much do anything I want very fluently and very nicely. And I appreciate to have that godlike thing that is the Rust compiler that really makes sure that if it compiles, it's probably working. And yes, Rust was the enabler for Gitoxide. Without that, I couldn't have done it. And I wouldn't even try to go through with this. 20 months of Gitoxide, I just recently released that on Reddit, my little retrospective. And even staying with the project for so long, it's not possible if you've got great technical issues there, which fortunately I don't have. And I really have to thank Rust for that and everything around it, tooling, community, learning resources, and so on.
I'm still trying to understand, so what is it about Rust that really enables you to do what you want to do? I know you talked about the borrow checker and all these kind of things. Is it the fact that it's really performance software that when it finally compiles that you have confidence in it? Or is it like the type system and how rigid it is? Or what is it that you said really empowers you?
It is the guarantee that if it compiles, it doesn't have 98% of the bugs that other programming languages could still allow you to have. And that allows me to write just a few tests, like on-point tests that kind of test the general flow, but I don't have to test every possible error condition. I can really focus my effort on what matters when it comes to software development. And that makes an extreme difference. Like having this, I write tests, of course, and depending on what I'm doing, I write even more and more tests. So just to be sure it really also acts the way it should, not only that it compiles, but that it really exhibits very specific behavior. So test-driven development is very important for that. But I also know that on top of that, I've got the borrow checker and the type system that allow me to perfectly express the valid states of the software and make these invalid states hard to be even represented, which makes it hard to misuse the API, which makes it easier to think about it. It's the whole process of creating an API and getting into the mindset of it while implementing it and going back and forth. It falls into place kind of just automatically. And I don't say it happens immediately. This is a process. And how many times have I refactored stuff as I improved myself or got a better understanding of what I'm trying to do there. But it always falls into place. And when the dust settles, it's better than before. You can say that about many software development projects, but with Rust, it's not just different. It's always better to the point where I say, yes, now it's there. Now it feels good. Now finally it feels right. And this incredible feeling, it's something I haven't had in any other programming language that I've written so far. And I've written in quite a few.
What's the other languages that you've actually played with? So I'm guessing, of course, Python, because you said you're a maintainer of Python Git or Git Python. I forgot how you call it. Git Python. What else have you written with?
Professionally, C++ quite a lot, but that was probably 12, 13 years ago as well, or 14 years. So long time. And I don't even know C++ anymore. Just so you know, I don't claim to know what C++ is nowadays. I did write some Go, but never professionally. I wrote a lot of JavaScript, TypeScript. So a bit of front end there, some Java too, but that's it. But never, really knowing a language by now, it kind of is only Rust and TypeScript, I guess, as the language I would use on the front end, for instance.
Okay. Now I'd like to kind of get back more into Gitoxide, right? So because of Rust, you feel really empowered. You can do the things you want to do. And one of those is kind of writing something that's very, very performant and can kind of rival C, C++, which of course Git is written in C. What about why did you start working on this Gitoxide? What's the point? Because Git is already pretty stable, I think, and used by so many people around the world. It's hard to find a bug, I think, that would really cause a problem with it. Why is it that you started working on Gitoxide?
Initially, 2018, I started the project, and there I started it just out of fun to see what I could do with Rust. Is Rust the language that I was always looking for? That was me trying to get an answer to that question by doing what I usually do, try to write Git in programming language X, like I did before with Go and C++, but they didn't work out for me. And Rust actually gave me the feeling that it could work because of, different ownership semantics, being able to move things around while having low-level access to the underlying bytes. Fearless concurrency is also something that intrigued me, like being able to multi-thread that thing without being afraid of issues with multi-threading. And we have all tried to find these non-deterministic bugs in software due to threads doing strange things with your memory. Can't really happen in Rust. And that also is something I wanted to try out. 2018, I think 1,400 lines of code were written in Rust before I put that project back to sleep for a while. Just because I felt I wasn't ready yet, and I didn't really have the time and motivation at this time. But then when it was 2020, April, COVID came along, and I was in lockdown in China in a small city. And that was the kind of place where you couldn't get out, locks in front of the community gates. You just couldn't go anywhere. So what would I do to distract myself? I would just see, hey, what's Gitoxide doing? I always I love Git. I really have a thing for it. So why not try again and see what Rust can do now and what I can do with Rust? And that's where it really continued. Also just as a passion project, nothing really that I saw as my future at this time. But then as it was picked up by Hacker News, then I realized that there's an incredible interest in seeing this implemented. People seem to be, I don't know for which reason, to be honest, but they seem to be wanting Git in Rust. So I just stayed with it and took it more and more seriously, to the point when, I just thought, why not actually do it? I also want to write an application in with Git, have my own kind of server system there. I want to one day create a product that is some sort of asset management systems for games companies or for media companies, because I've got a whole career in my past in visual effects. So I kind of know their asset management needs. And why not use Git to help doing that? And for that, I need a server. So why not try to implement that? So this is how I could kind of align my future demand with Gitoxide and just say, okay, let's do this now. Let's do it full time. That's it.
Okay, that makes sense. If you have time, might as well just do it, right? Okay, so what's the current status of where it's at right now? What can it do and what can it not do?
Gitoxide right now has multiple parts to it. The server part, well, it's not there, unfortunately, so you can't use it as a server at all. Starting with the weakest point, moving upwards to things that are more developed. What you can do perfectly is, for example, clone a repository. Not all the way, but you can get the pack and can do things with that data. You can operate in the commit graph. You can access all information that is in the Git repository, like references and objects. And for that, by now you have a very nice API. It's in the Git repository crate. So that's the entry point for people who want to write applications. And that is where you have an API. It's at least on par with what you would get in Git 2, but faster. And, it stays fast as you throw multiple threads on it. I think that's also a major difference compared to, let's say, Git 2, which you can also use for the same thing. And probably by now you would still use that, because there's many things that are also still not supported in Gitoxide that people usually do, like Git status and Git diff. that's still not there, unfortunately. The focus right now is to get the server part going. This means you need a lot of additional file formats that are usually only on the server or only relevant on the server to speed up certain operations. And that's pretty much the current state. So people who want to write the applications, they have a limited use out of it, but they can possibly use it for certain things that are related to accessing data in the Git repository and, obtaining some information or making some computations. I've written a few small tools that exercise that. So it's very useful for that and very pleasant as well, and very fast, of course.
Yeah, I actually never heard of Git2 until you got back to me over email and you gave some questions you think we should talk about. And I've seen Git2 RS, which is kind of run by the Rustlang community. What exactly is Git2? Because it seems like Git2 is actually written in C also, but then this Git2 RS is just providing bindings. Is that right?
That's true. There is the C library called libgit2, and libgit2 is the destination for a lot of bindings. It has bindings for Ruby, Python, Rust, Lua. Every programming language out there basically binds to Git2, and Git2 is the, probably most complete implementation of everything related to Git that can be used as a library. Because Git itself, it's just a bunch of command line tools, and you can't use it as a library. So that's where libgit2 comes in. And Git2RS is the crate that governs the bindings for Rust. And it's really, really well done, I must say. Like, it's pretty awesome because the libgit2 project is just C, and you know how it is. You have to init something to allocate memory, and then you are allowed to call a bunch of functions, and you have to deallocate it and think about a ton of things, even do simple things. And the Rust bindings, they put that into an API that feels idiomatic, and it is actually very easily and conveniently usable, and it's amazing work. I must say it's great. So most people just want to use that and they will be happy with it. However, when you need the highest performance, you will not be happy with libgit2 because it's not optimized for that somehow. And if you need, to host your own Git server, you also can't use libgit2 because it doesn't implement that at all. And certain things libgit2 is basically geared towards application developments and clients who clone and fetch and push, but it's not anything more than that. And if you do multi-threading with libgit2, then you're stuck. Like, you can do it. It's thread safe because of the bindings that Rust provides. That's great, but it doesn't get faster when you throw multiple threads of it onto it. It's sometimes the opposite, or often the opposite. Due to strong contention, it actually gets slower. So to give you some numbers on my machine, and it's just some silly benchmarks with that disclaimer. Gitoxide is easily, when it comes to object access, 30-40% faster on one core, but Gitoxide scales with each core and gives you near perfect scaling. So Gitoxide is incredibly fast and performant due to that. Once you can use all your cores in your computer, and that's amazing. That's I think why also Gitoxide has a place, because it's done with multi-threading support in mind, like for today's computers, right? And it's something that will scale and that will not betray you as you use multiple threads. There is no issue with that thanks to Rust. So finally, you can write these high performance applications both in the front end or both on client side and on the server side. Thanks to the technology advances, let's say, that Gitoxide can benefit from.
So have you ever thought about actually kind of releasing a C compatible lib that people could use, and then they can get more powerful use out of Git? So kind of like a replacement for libgit2?
I mean, basically write Gitoxide in C and then, or have C bindings to Gitoxide.
I mean, C compatible library bindings. So basically you can use FFI with your library. So like you can, hook Python in, or even hook another C program in, etc.
it's already planned to do that, because Git Python is something I still maintain. And for a while, it was horrible for me because it was just a burden and I couldn't see any benefit of it. But then I was realizing that there is a ton of users that basically have to deal with all the shortcomings, and there's no way this is ever going to be fixed. So why not do this one last push and create Git Python, I don't know, 5.0 or Git Python next generation, call it what you want. But the next release of Git Python that will actually just use bindings to Gitoxide and then just be the Python version of Gitoxide, using the high-level API that Gitoxide provides, just one-to-one. And that should be nice to use, and that should be easy to use. And that should be something people will appreciate. And that's something on the list. For that, you need, I don't know if you need C bindings per se. I just know there's another awesome Rust project called Pyo3. Is it Pyo3 Pyoxide? Maybe. So
yeah, there's Pyo3, yeah, but that one's for binding for anything with Rust, right?
yes, but it allows you to expose a Rust API to Python. And that's exactly what I would want to do for Gitoxide and make this as easy as possible. So I think using Pyo3 for that binding generation would be the way. Would still not be a C binding per se or some C exposed things. I think that comes, like if that ever comes, that comes once Gitoxide is a full success and everybody wants to use it instead of libgit2. Then I think that's something that could be done. Even though I don't know where to find the time for that, and if there's a way. Once there are more contributors, maybe this can happen.
Okay. Yeah, and there's also some other competing libraries also in Rust too. No, I think you can't be the only one. There's got to be some other ones besides Git2 and of course Gitoxide.
Yeah, I mean, would I call them competing? I don't feel that way at all. Just so you know, not because, yeah, I feel it's all trying to do something new with Git, and you do it in your own way. So I'm happy for everybody who wants to try that, because it's also a lot of work and it's not always easy. Are there other libraries that are still actively maintained like Gitoxide? No, I don't know of any. There are some crates that have been seeing some development and that can do a few things like read packs and maybe create packs or something like that. Read loose objects, like the basics, you know. But Git is so much more than that. And from what I can tell, in Rust, there's no other project that is actively developed like Gitoxide. And if there was, I think these developers, if they hear this, they should definitely reach out and see if we can band together and just combine resources and find a way to move on together, because Git is big. There's a lot about Git that most people don't know and don't have to know. That's quite fascinating. Git is not easy. Git is not simple anymore, anyway.
Which is kind of funny considering what Git is supposed to mean, right? Git's supposed to mean, I think, stupid, which I don't think Git is stupid in itself. But it's very powerful, but also very simple at the same time. At least now it is compared to before when it first came out. I think when it first came out, it was pretty tough. But now it seems much better. What I do see, kind of just looking through some changes over Gitoxide, is that you actually used to use the I don't know what you would call this, the application name or something called Gix, Gix, and you change it to EIN, which is interesting.
Yes.
So, I mean, Gix, I think makes more sense, right? Because Gitoxide or something like that. But then now it's EIN. Is that a German thing or is that something else? Because I just think about the Ein is kind of German sounding.
Yes, it is German. I mean, Ein is an article in German, just means A. But it's not for that. It's just a short for Einstein. And I was thinking, like the physicist Einstein, right? It came over me. I don't know if I will change the name back to something else. But for now, I say, how can I not lose track of what Ein is supposed to be? So I wanted kind of the opposite of a Git. I wanted it to be something very, very smart, I guess. Maybe even genius level, kind of something you really want to use. Because the Git UI or the Git command line interface, it's often criticized for causing difficulties, and I can understand why. It's kind of an expert tool, and also I know just like my 5 commands that I always use, and that's it. And none of the tons of other commands that you can use, and low-level plumbing commands, for example, which is fair. Honestly, it's fair. I wouldn't criticize Git for it. It's just has a certain goal, and it, I think, fulfills this very well, which is not having the nicest usability out there. Not yet, anyway. They're getting better at this. And with Ein, I wanted to remind myself that it should really do something very different with the way you interact with Git repositories. And I wanted to allow myself to really rethink the way you want to interact with Git. And I don't even know what that is yet, but I know I want to use all the tools at my disposal. That is, maybe make a terminal user interface, but maybe only a partial terminal user interface, maybe some sort of, something that really helps you to get through the process of getting done what you want to do. And it should figure out pretty smartly what that probably is and kind of guide you along the way without doing too much hand-holding. That's kind of my rough vision of it. And I didn't even start working on that yet because, yes, the server side first, and then we kind of get into the front end a bit later, but it's definitely out there. Jigs, by the way, is still there as a binary, but now Jigs is just for plumbing. So these low-level commands that do a very specific thing that most people don't ever need. But I write these tools just to make it a bit easier to test out what I'm doing there. Like make it accessible on the command line, write journey tests for that, apply jigs to big repositories, and use my own implementation outside of the unit test sandbox and put it into the real world, so to say, with real repositories. And that's why I write these jigs commands. And people could possibly use them for scripting or for Git maintenance, but it's definitely expert level and very, very specific. And Ein, that's what I want to use one day to be the daily driver for my workflow. The Ein, help me to commit, show me what's going on, synchronize with the server. It's kind of a workflow that's Ein one day.
Okay, I understand. That makes sense. And interesting as you say Jix. I always thought it would be Gix because I'm thinking about Git with a G. But I believe, yeah. Why is it that you use the J sound for G? Is that a German thing, or am I missing something?
I think Jix. I didn't think about it, by the way. So that must be pure intuition. I don't know if it's because of my cultural background or not, or my language background. Sounds cuter to me somehow, Jix. Because gigs, I don't know, gigs sounds like giggles, and that's my explanation for it. I guess there is no real way of saying it. You say it how you want to. There's no official way yet. Nobody uses it. So,
but what I find interesting is that you actually use other kind of Git reimplementations as a reference source, right? So specifically, you mentioned. So what I'm talking about over here is the notes that you put into our little note sheet before the show. Is that you mentioned JGit? You kind of use that as a way to check to see if everything is working okay.
Oh, JGit, I never used myself. I also didn't study the code. But it's definitely the most mature reimplementation out there as far as I can tell. It's even as far as kind of trying out new things. Like you must see, I didn't know that before, so maybe I explain that just real quick. Git as a tool, the canonical Git that we all use, that's the C version. And that basically lives on the mailing list, and it's C Hermano. I don't know if I pronounced that name correctly. They're the maintainer of that, and it's a huge project, and it's very mature, and it can't move quickly, obviously, because it's not easy to implement things in C, and you shouldn't break stuff. So these secondary implementations, they are the ones who can experiment more freely, because sure, they should also not break the world, but I think it's a different workflow for them, and JGit is the one that could propose a bunch of new file formats or a bunch of ways to improve Git in itself and could prove that it's working. I think GraphTable is among the ones. No, that was Google, I think, who at least implemented that in C. But anyway, JGit also added some implementations, and then they become mainstream by being adopted by by canonical Git. And then it becomes documentation or technical documentation in the Git repository. And then somebody comes along and implements that for Git in C. And then it becomes available in the binary. JGit, I couldn't really, I can't really read Java, or I can't make myself read Java. It's just too complicated for me. So I focus on things I can more easily understand. So if I want to look at some implementations for reference, I actually just use canonical Git implementation. Just look at the C code because it's, well written or easy to read for my eyes. Sometimes I look at libgit too, but by now more and more, once I realized that libgit 2 is also just kind of a partial implementation, I realized that the only truth source of how things should be is canonical Git. So I basically focus on that and don't get sidetracked by anything else, which isn't always the right thing. Some really interesting implementations I think they're coming from JGit as far as I could tell. But it's just something I get from other sources. Let's say I didn't really use JGit myself. Yeah. So canonical Git, that's the way for me to learn how Git itself works and to know the kind of quality level I have to hit if I want to at least be on par with what Git can do and how Git does it. And I can tell you, Git usually does things very well and in a way that has the chance to perform very well too. So you can't just be sloppy with your implementation. I use Rust. It's the greatest tool in the world, and it's just naturally awesome. No, it's not. So I have to be algorithmically at least on par with what Git does, and Git usually does the computer sciencey stuff very well. So it's a good idea to look at Git if you want to re-implement it.
So, that's pretty interesting. So when you're looking at Git in C, are you just kind of porting that over directly, or are you actually porting it, or actually looking at just the code inside Git and then thinking about what's a good way to do it, or what's a good way to do it with your current Gitoxide, and then kind of doing it from there? Are you just kind of seeing what's the final format, what comes in, what goes out, and then you make it up in the middle, or how do you kind of take that as a reference?
Yeah, so my reference is definitely not literal. Can't be, because C is just too different. I mean, my goal is to have the best possible Rust implementation, which means it's idiomatic. But by looking at the C code, you see algorithms used, you see all the details, what it really means to implement something that's just in code. It's perfect. And then you just imagine how that would look like in Rust and make it rusty, so to say. That's how I do it. So there's never a literal re-implementation of the C code that I read, except for core algorithms that are really just about encoding a bunch of bytes or decoding a bunch of bytes. There's nothing you can do even in Rust that makes it more rusty. You just have to, handle the bytes and do some bit operations to it. And when you go down to these bitwise ops, then C is usually as concise as it gets, and Rust will just blow it up a little in terms of verbosity. But it's still essentially the same. And I don't try to make that more rusty because it can't be. It's just, do bit operation here, do bit operation there, and there just do it one by one because I don't want to mess it up. That's the low level kind of thing that I'm a bit afraid of usually. So I'm happy to take that more literally. But everything related algorithms and the big picture kind of thing, that's definitely not to be taken literally from C. Just today I wrote something that is related to writing these chunk files. So Git has a chunk file format that is pretty new that it uses for multi-pack indices and for commit graph files. Both are file types that most people don't really use or need, but it's useful on the server to speed up things. And the way the chunk files are written, it's actually quite nice to see that done in C. So they have function pointers and use them for callbacks and kind of make a nice API that is reusable in C. And I appreciate to see that. It's like C, one could think of it as, it's this old language that makes it super easy to write heartbleeds, and it's super dangerous to use. And all that is kind of true. But also, you can write kind of nice looking things to it. I appreciate Git's code despite it being written in C. And I just know I couldn't do that. I couldn't write C without feeling terrible all the time, because I know I've probably put 5 terrible bugs in there just in my one line there, right? So once I take this and think, okay, how would I do this in Rust and make it rusty? And you find real nice representations of that only in Rust you would do, because of the way Rust thinks and the way a Rust programmer thinks. And you see the difference between these APIs and the respective advantages. And usually I favor the Rust API, the idiomatic Rust API over anything you would write in C, because it's safer and sometimes even easier. Then I'm thinking, yeah, it's, Rust is a whole different mindset that comes to you, and it kind of all comes together. I mentioned that before. It falls in place. And when you can see the C baseline that is already kind of beautiful C, so to say, like high-end C that I consider good by all means. And you see that Rust can be as good or even better in terms of harder to misuse, harder to abuse, impossible to put strange bugs in it that cause memory issues. It's incredible what Rust does to the programming world. And this is why finally Rust has taken off, to my mind. It's not, sure, to some it's a hype, and for the right reason, they're annoyed by people always saying, Rust, rewrite everything. But they do that because they have seen, or maybe even experienced, that new world that Rust has created for us, and that new ability that comes with it. And rewriting Git in Rust is something that Rust is an enabler for, because I could not do that in any other language. And I really tried to find the language that enables me. And finally, Rust is the one. And now I'm at this point of no return where I also say, yes, I spent so much time on it, and other people contributed. 2 crates have been fully contributed to the Gitoxide project. So now it's also sponsored, by the way. There are sponsors now on GitHub that want it, and companies are interested in it. So it's also viable as an income source, and as something to make as big as possible, find contributors for, and just put all your resources in terms of all my resources, and really try to make it live up to its potential, which is more than just being technologically nice, which is, to really allow us to innovate in the space of Git repositories and Git applications, revision control systems, to maybe one day let Gitoxide be that project or that third-party implementation of Git that can contribute the next level of file system, or the next level of file formats, the next major improvements that later gets adopted by Git itself. Why not? I think it's a possibility, and it's something also to strive for, to make it such a major player. But yes, still a couple of years ahead until that can happen, I presume.
Oh, that's interesting. You actually have sponsors, right? So, like, how many people are sponsoring you, and like, how are you using this money to actually better the project?
Yeah, right now I'm really not good at investing per se. I tried, and it didn't work out initially because of me and my, let's say, immaturity when it comes to how to invest in things, no matter what, especially an open source project. I do try to set a budget and kind of find people that can use that budget to contribute meaningfully to the project. And it's just the difficulty of it is to find people who can deliver the value for the budget as well, the way you see or want the value to be delivered, let's say. Because it's also easy to just pay and, not really see the value or have difficulty seeing that evolve or something like that. And this is something I still have to grow into, but something I do want to do, because ultimately money is there exactly for that. And the more sponsorship works out, the more I will think about reinvesting. as a matter of fact, I also do some YouTube sessions together with my colleague and friend Sydney, and he was learning Rust, and we did a season of learning Rust with Gitoxide together, I think 17 episodes or so. Then we are currently doing a season on YouTube that is about getting into Gitoxide, where we use our Rust knowledge to actually use Git repository and write little apps and make Git repository better, add API that is currently missing, learn from Git 2 in the process as well. And we are doing this together. We are recording it to one day enable him to, contribute to Gitoxide himself, and also to maybe find projects that currently use Git 2 and then oxidize them, and then replace Git 2 with Gitoxide and potentially add to Gitoxide what's currently missing to make that project work. And that's something that he, of course, should be paid for. And that's what I'm actively setting money aside. So that's a very one-on-one kind of solution that I'm going with now that, takes a lot of time. And I think that is more the way I see this work. So must be very personal, at least initially, to have a few people that you're very close with. And from there, maybe the circle can grow. Of course, independently of paid work or paid contributors, there's always, the project is always open and has been found by contributors who just contributed code or a whole crate. And maybe that is also made easier by providing this YouTube material to help getting into Gitoxide more easily.
What I also find interesting too is that you post a timesheet on here when you're working on open source. I don't know if it's you only working on open source, but that's all I can see is Gitoxide and I think Git Python. And I'd also see you as $0 amount, so I guess you're not paying yourself for all this time. That's what this means. So I didn't know if this was like related to the sponsorship at all or not.
Yeah, I didn't put in any amounts there because it makes no sense to do that. It's overall GitHub sponsors. I think currently that pays $1,150 or so, or a bit less, a bit more. So that's a lot already. That pays quite a few bills here in China. So that's great. But having a value that you pay yourself per hour, that doesn't make sense with this amount, let's say. It's just nothing useful. Yes, these timesheets, it's all about transparency. So I try to make as much public as I can. So the sponsorship itself, like the money that comes in Euro, you can see that as well. There is a .gov folder that has a CSV table there, and that shows like all the GitHub income that I see on my account, and also what I paid out so far to contributors. So the in and out is going to be visible there, and you see there's not so much outgoing yet. So probably that changes next year. And the timesheets, they're super interesting to me. I don't think they're very useful to anybody who wants to contribute. But it's just interesting to me to know how much time I spent in maintenance of all the other open source projects that I maintain. Also know how much time I effectively spent on Gitoxide. And sometimes I also do paid work. So that also goes into the timesheets, but I don't upload these. So I kind of filter the jobs that I put my time in, and that's only the open source things that you see there.
All right, that's pretty cool. I didn't even notice this .gov folder, but it's pretty interesting. It's good that you have like kind of public accounting on what's going on. Not a lot of people have that, I think. So that's important.
Yes. Just a note about this, because really it's the whole government thing of Gitoxide. It's very much, it's very immature right now. It doesn't have to be more mature because it's basically just me. But it's something that I can imagine can be much more fleshed out as more people contribute and also want to have some share in Gitoxide or earn their share because they spend so much time on it and so on. So by setting the basis with this .gov folder, I try to set the basis for, okay, I want to be transparent. this is something that ultimately Gitoxide is going to be free and stay free. The license will always be, it's not going to change. So how can I make the government process or the process of what to do with the project, how can I make that more transparent? How can I make it easy for people to join? Maybe by being transparent, I show that I want to be transparent about it and want people to participate. And then from there, you can take it in many directions. I don't know if you heard about Radical. Radical.xyz is the domain I could mention here. They're doing a decentralized Git Git repository hosting essentially, but they provide much more than that. So I imagine it as decentralized GitHub with governance built in. So you can have your own organizations there. It's all on blockchain kind of, you have your tokens. It's basically like having votes, and the more tokens you have, the more maybe that gives you the majority vote, and then you can basically vote on the blockchain and do completely decentralized governance of any kind of open source project. And that will then be applied to Git repositories and the code there and the people working on the code. And of course, that also allows sponsorships and financing and everything. So they're building that thing that maybe one day Gitoxide can run on and can be governed with. This is a future I'd like to embrace, because in a way we are like, maybe that's the future we are all heading to. Like, why only make this for open source project? Why not let this scale to companies? So if I say I want to have a product that is running on Gitoxide, why not have the company being like mostly fully automated, run on something that is decentralized, to have some software to run it, and invite everybody to, to chime in or to make their own kind of fork somewhere in China. And then you run the same kind of company based on the template and just set it up in your own locale, because I can't be everywhere. I can't serve all the markets ever. And I don't want to do that, So I'm believing in having or using open software and open processes and transparency to also enable others to do the same and to generate income from that, and to work together collaboratively with all, even if that means that maybe one day people say, okay, we are in China, now we enter the German market where you are. Well, that can happen, but it's also something that I don't want to ever prevent from happening. I'm all up for that. I'm more into collaboration, and I think that's the way to go. But to me, it's about setting up systems that everybody can use and that everybody can benefit from, and everybody can have their piece of the pie, so to say. So maybe that's something that this whole Web3 stuff, decentralization stuff, automation on public databases, essentially, maybe that's what we can learn from that. So I hope that the company that I maybe one day can found based on Gitoxide technology can leverage this and show that this actually works, and not have this traditional kind of company where everything is, yours, but have this thing that is online and that is very, very flexible and automated. Yeah, but I might digress here. It's kind of way beyond Gitoxide, but Gitoxide can be a part of it, and maybe my first steps into the whole governance thing.
Okay, sounds good. All right, it's good to hear kind of the vision of what's in your mind. I think we're starting to run a little bit low on time. Is there anything that you want to kind of let people know about Gitoxide, maybe some future plans for it? Or actually, we talked about the future already. I don't know if there's maybe some more immediate future, or any kind of call for help you want people to help out with docs, or can help out with the code, or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, if you're new to Rust and want to learn, then you can check Learning Rust with Gitoxide on YouTube. It's linked in the README on Gitoxide itself. So once you scroll down a little, you will find it there. And if you want to get into Gitoxide, there's also a bunch of episodes about that. I think that's the best material that there currently is to get into, next to the code itself or the documentation. And of course, contributing something you are interested in, or simply starting to use Gitoxide in your own application, that's most appreciated, because that will drive Git repository forward and Gitoxide forward, and make it more useful for actual people, because the whole server side, it's kind of it's much more narrow space, and most people are probably less interested in that right now.
Totally understand. Okay. What about, do you have any kind of tips or kind of tricks for beginners, and maybe some warnings that they should kind of like be careful about if they're starting to get into Rust nowadays?
I don't know what it means to get into Rust nowadays, because my time was 5 or 6 years ago, and there everything was, I guess, a little bit harder with Rust 1.0 approaching, and the compiler wasn't as friendly as it is now, nor was it as capable. I think it's worth getting into Rust and not be thinking badly of the compiler, who might just not compile a code that usually would always work. So trying to not get frustrated, because it's really worth it. Like, once you have that little tumor grown in your head that allows you to finally understand what Rust really is about, which is a bunch of simple rules that it enforces at compile time, then you will see that this affects your entire way of thinking, even in other programming languages. And this is something that I think only Rust can do to you, or at least to me, that was the case. And that's absolutely worth it. Worth the pain that you might experience, but maybe there is no pain anymore because it's all great now.
Yeah, I have to say the pain at the beginning of using Rust is painful. But yeah, once you start to understand the rules and you go with it, you can, especially if you're a seasoned developer or somebody who's been doing C++ or C, when you get the rules down and you go back to C, you can start to kind of see, oh, I would actually hit a problem if I did this, and thank God I'm kind of used to using Rust or something like that. Or if you've already had these problems before and you're like, oh, this is great, this is why it's doing this, then I've done this before, I've seen this before, I've heard of this before, this kind of stuff. Like the mute keyword is very interesting, right? Like, it's really makes it very clear this thing's going to change, even for pointers, right? Like a mute pointer, I think it's called, and a const pointer. You never think a pointer is a pointer, right? in C and C++, but having that, like, what's the word for that one? Semantic kind of pointer. Very clear what you're going to do with this thing. It's very interesting, I think.
And most beginners in particular, but many Rust programmers, they won't ever deal with pointers anyway. And that's great. I have small experience with pointers only. I only had to get into this because I was implementing some async stuff in Gitoxide, and I really didn't want to. But I was like I'm afraid of pointers, right? But in Rust, they're nothing to be feared, because pointers themselves, they're not dangerous. Only if you dereference the memory behind the pointer, then it can get dangerous, and then Rust forces you to declare that as unsafe, and then you have to deal with the consequences potentially. But I found it interesting to see that the borrow checker is still on for pointers, right? And it's still very much the same as it is for references, and it all makes sense. And it's great to see that pointers are not just a get out of jail free card for or Wild West do what you want kind of card, but it's still as enforcing as possible, even with pointers. Yeah. And unsafe, you only need that in very few occasions, and of course should keep these portions as small as possible. Yeah. Gitoxide does have some, but I'm never proud of it, and I never want that. And I'm always afraid when I write unsafe code. That's still after a bunch of experience with Rust, and I think it's a good thing to never have had to write more unsafe code than I did so far.
Yeah, I definitely know when we have to use the unsafe keyword, I also feel a little bit worried, But in any case, I really thank you for your time, and it's great to hear about Gitoxide, and I should keep following it because it sounds very interesting, and I learned a lot more about Git with libgit 2. I never even knew about this, so this is pretty interesting. I appreciate your time. Maybe I'll have you back on again, like when the project is farther along, to kind of see how it's going. Hopefully you keep up with it. Maybe you'll be a billionaire by the time you come back on, with you kind of getting more and more popular with companies and people coming out there that want to use your stuff.
Well, let's see about that. Companies, they're also quite aware of the buzz factor that happens with these one-people enterprises. So I still have a long way to go to remedy this, and I'm working on it. Thanks so much for having me on the show. And I do hope to be back as well. Maybe in a year from now, Then we can see how far the project has gotten and what's new as well.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you so much.